Bonjour mes amis, et bienvenue à Paris. While in the city of love, lights, and amazing food, I wanted to do a video or three highlighting all the amazing cuisine to be had here. Unfortunately, I'm not a very good multitasker, and the responsibilities of being tour director for our trip meant that I didn't really have time to set up quality video recordings in each place we stopped. By no means was this a today is Tuesday, you must be in the Louvre kind of trips, but it was still a pretty busy itinerary, and well, that's the excuse I'm going to give for only having crappy cell phone photos to share with you. I also didn't get to try everything on my list, since half of it consisted of items I would try if we happened to run across it, rather than having a concrete plan for when and where we would encounter each dish. So, this is just going to be a brief overview of the things I did try, and a little bit of history behind each one. So, here we go. Start off with the baguette. No clear history exists for this symbol of French food culture, and certainly baton and stick-like bread products existed back into the 18th century and earlier for that matter. Over time, these breads would become refined through better flour milling technologies, better ovens, and the availability of affordable and consistent commercial yeasts, until the Department of the Seine laid down standards by which all baguettes worthy of the name would have to adhere. However, the standard by which we will judge a baguette are firmness and crispness of the crust, light and fluffy interior with a good rise, but not huge void spaces inside, which still presents a good chew, and an even, lightly seasoned, bready flavor. Croissant. Okay, pour yourself a bit of cafe au lait and settle in, kids, because this is a long one. The croissant, along with the baguette, is almost a symbol of French cuisine, and it is surrounded by as much lore and myth as historical fact. So here are the facts. The modern croissant is a flaky, crescent-shaped bread made from a heavily laminated dough that can trace its lineage back to Austria at least as far back as the 13th century, when the kifli or kipferl was the bread of choice. Roll came in a variety of shapes, but often came in a crescent, and is believed by some to have arisen even earlier as an offering to the moon goddess Selene. This type of bread became popular in the mid-1800s when Austrian August Zang opened a Viennese-style bakery in Paris, and his Kipferl and Vienna loaf became so popular that all the other bakeries stole the idea and started making crescent-shaped bread themselves, rebranding them as croissants. Sylvain Claudius Goy, a French chef, was credited as the first to make the croissant out of a yeast-leavened, laminated dough, which extends beyond simply croissants into a broader group of pastries known as viennoiserie, which includes laminated baked goods like pain au chocolat, danishes, and oranais, as well as brioche and some turnovers. There are a lot of myths behind the croissant, but the most prevalent one is that the croissant was invented as a sort of snub to represent the Islamic crescent in commemoration of the defeat of the Ottomans in the siege of Vienna in 1583, or possibly earlier in 732 AD when the Franks defeated the Umayyad Caliphate. Although these attributions are not true, the stories persist to this day and are pervasive enough that some Islamic fundamentalists continue to ban the sale and consumption of croissants, because they're considered kind of racist. Another myth about the croissant is that Marie Antoinette actually introduced it to France. It's kind of unlikely because the croissant and viennoiserie type pastries are a relatively modern invention. In fact, the word croissant made its entry into the French dictionary in 1863, like 70 years after Marie Antoinette died, so it's unlikely that she did this. But she would have loved this, pain au chocolat, which is a viennoiserie. It has the same flaky pastry dough as a croissant, but it has chunks of chocolate embedded in it. And Marie Antoinette had a notorious sweet tooth, so she would have loved this, as do millions of French people every morning. What breakfast would be complete without a strong cup of French coffee? And French coffee tends to be brewed very strong, very dark, very bitter. So typically what Americans will order when in France is cafe au lait, which is what you see here. It's about half and half French coffee and steamed milk. And that comes out to right about the strength that we can kind of tolerate. the quintessential working man's lunch, the jambon beurre, literally ham butter. The jambon beurre arose to feed the hungry masses in the 18th century, and it's easy to see why. It's simplicity itself, using freshly baked baguette bread, Parisian ham or jambon de Paris, good fresh butter, and that's it. Sometimes it benefits from the addition of cheese, like you see here, but that's not required. It fits neatly into my toasted cheese philosophy. Sometimes something almost ridiculously simple, executed really well, can be better than some of the best that haute cuisine and fine dining can offer. Okay, this one kind of twisted my brain when I first heard about it. Oeuf mayonnaise, or oeuf mayo. And it is exactly as the name implies, eggs with mayonnaise on them. I couldn't figure out why anyone would want that. Now, as it turns out, the sauce is more like a béarnaise. It had whole grain mustard mixed in. It had chives, some other spices and herbs mixed into it. So it had a lot more flavor. But still, it's an egg-based sauce on top of eggs. And I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised because I also like eggs Benedict, and that is, the hollandaise is an egg-based sauce. So you're putting eggs on eggs. This was likewise way, way better than I was expecting. Really, really creamy yolks, nice, firm but not rubbery whites, and the sauce just pulls it all together with this lovely, lovely flavor. The big surprise of the trip, definitely. French food without mentioning the crepe. Pretty sure it's a law. This is a thin, griddle-cooked pancake made of either wheat or buckwheat flour, often spread with a variety of toppings, both sweet and savory, before folding or rolling for consumption. Now, I have one filled with Nutella. It's kind of a classic these days. There is a legend that the French crepe was invented by accident in the 13th century, when someone spilled either a wheat or buckwheat porridge onto a hot griddle, and, not wanting to waste food, ate the cooked result, and the rest, as they say, was history. Maybe an apocryphal story, but similar stories exist around the world for different cultures in their own homegrown crepe-like creations, from dosas in India to Chinese jianbing, from Norwegian panekaka to Greek crepes, from Russian blini, often served with caviar, to Indonesian kue leker and ledres. They can be served plain, spread with Nutella, like I said here, jams and jellies, honey. The savory versions, often called galettes to sort of differentiate them from crepes, typically use a buckwheat crepe and fill it with things like cheese, ham, even sautéed mushrooms. Here we have a croque madame, the fancier version of a croque monsieur. The title croque monsieur comes from croquer, to bite, and monsieur meaning Mr. It's literally a gentleman's sandwich. It first appears in literature in a work by Proust, In Search of Lost Time, 1918, but it had featured on menus in Paris as early as 1910. One origin story places it at a Paris brasserie on the Boulevard de Capucines. Having run out of baguettes for the restaurant's sandwich of the day, the chef took a loaf of pain de mie, which is similar to American sandwich bread, sliced it, placed ham and cheese beneath the slices, and baked it to crispness. When asked by a customer about the meat, the chef reportedly gestured toward another customer, likely the neighborhood butcher, and replied, "C'est la viande de monsieur. It's that guy's meat." And voila, le croque monsieur. Here we have some steak tartare. I've talked about this before in previous videos, and to be honest, we've eaten raw meat since before recorded history. When we were hunter-gatherers and hadn't discovered fire yet, we were eating raw meat. Food doesn't get much simpler than carving some meat off a carcass, maybe cutting it into smaller pieces, and devouring it. Obviously, for safety reasons, if you have a compromised immune system, you probably don't want to eat this. But to be safer, you want to make sure that the beef is really, really fresh, really, really clean, handled well, prepared well. And so when you get in a restaurant, you sort of hope that it's a restaurant that you trust. The dish that we would come to call steak tartare is actually a French invention, but was originally known as steak à l'américaine. It featured raw beef paired with tartar sauce, and some called it steak with tartar sauce, eventually shortening it to simply steak tartare. Eventually, the raw egg yolk would be added in place of the tartar sauce, and the recipe would get refined to include capers and shallots, and you get the dish you see today. Now, this version that I got in this particular brasserie had more capers in it than I put into my version, and honestly, this one was so much better. It was just really high quality beef and just really, really deep, intense flavors. I loved it. Now, France has great expanses of shoreline and thus access to lots of fresh seafood. And mussels, or moule, are a big ticket item on a lot of menus. This was actually prepared with broth and white wine. There's also moule marinière, which is mussels prepared in a marinara sauce. That's also a very popular one. Not very expensive and a really, really tasty treat. Okay, let's talk eggs for a moment. This is actually an omelet. When we were at Mont Saint-Michel, there was a local type of omelet that is prepared over in a wide pan over an open fire. And there's something you need to know about French omelets, French-style omelets. They tend to be a little runny. Now this, because it's prepared over an open fire, is really, really toasty on the bottom, but when they fold it over, it is still quite goopy in the middle, and that's something you kind of have to get used to in France. It's not my favorite thing, to be honest. I prefer the curds of my eggs to be fully set. And it's a very careful balancing act because you don't want to overcook them and make them rubbery, but I don't also want them to kind of squish. So, wasn't my favorite thing. Oh, the aligot. I saw this on the menu at this bistro and had to try it. Now, full disclosure, this is not the full meal deal, complete aligot experience like you would get if you went to a restaurant that actually specialized in aligot. But we didn't have time for that, so I got lucky enough to get this as a substitute. Now, what the little cast iron Dutch oven there on the right contains a mixture of over mashed potatoes. They've been mashed until they're a little bit gummy, and that's okay in this case, because they're combined about 50-50 with a really stretchy white cheese. And once they're combined, they become this almost elastic sort of gummy substance that sticks really well to things like the sausage that they served it with, where you can just dip it in. And it sounds weird. It is weird, but it's delicious. The creaminess is the sort of elastic creaminess of the aligot serves as sort of a neutral foil, I guess, for the spicing of the sausage that you dip into it. And the flavor combination is quite amazing. You do need to eat this hot because as it cools, as you know, mashed potatoes do, it becomes even gummier as it cools. But highly recommend if you ever get the chance to try. I would be remiss if this list did not include the eclair, a pastry made with choux dough, filled with usually like a vanilla cream and topped with a flavored icing. This is the classic here with the chocolate icing on top. The name comes from the French word éclair, meaning French flash of lightning. Presumably that means it's eaten in a flash. It's eaten quickly. It originated in the 19th century, where it was called pain à la duchesse, or petite duchesse, until about 1850, and then it gained the name of éclair. I don't know what else to say about the eclair other than if you've never tried one, you need to go out and get one right now because they are delicious. Light, airy pastry filled with that lovely vanilla cream, and the icing is usually chocolate, like I said, but sometimes it has fruit or fruit preserves on top. You just have to get one. Little confection is a macaron. Believed to originally be of Italian origin dating back to the 8th century, they made their way to France by way of Catherine de' Medici, who married France's King Henri II in 1533 and brought her Italian chefs and bakers with her. Originally, these were known as priests' belly buttons. Sure, we'll go with that. They were served in 1581 during the marriage of the Duke of Joyeuse in Ardèche and were given as gifts to guests at Versailles when King Louis XIV chose to take up residence there in 1682. During the French Revolution, the Macaron sisters, Marguerite and Marie Elizabeth, sought asylum in the city of Nancy, and being skilled bakers, they set up shop producing all manner of patisserie, including priests' belly buttons. Their renown spread, and soon they became known as the Macarons de Nancy. Now formally known as macarons, they consist of 2 meringue-based cookies sandwiched around a cream filling of, well, any number of flavors. At Paris's famous La Durée, you can get matcha green tea, black currant and violet, grapefruit and timid pepper, even licorice-flavored macarons. And I'm going to try them all. Little delight is a madeleine, a semi-legendary mini cake baked in metal aspic molds with a characteristic shallow, seed-like tapered shape. These are much beloved in France and have several nearly apocryphal origin stories such that no one is entirely sure when the first one was baked. Some attribute them to Genevieve, a pastry chef who worked for Prince Talleyrand in the 19th century, but although he may have made madeleines for the prince, he didn't invent them, because the first printed recipe for them goes back to 1758, and there is some evidence they were baked in some form as far back as the Middle Ages, but the recipe itself was only passed on verbally for centuries. Another story involves a girl named Madeline who brought the recipe back with her from a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Since the town of Commercy has become the capital of the Madeleine, another story places its invention there by a young servant girl named Madeleine Paulmier, serving the deposed king of Poland, Stanislaw Leczinski, who was living in exile in Lorraine at the time. In any event, the Madeleine is a cookie-like mini cake that was made famous throughout France when Louis XV was first introduced to them on a visit to Lorraine, and his wife Marie introduced them to the French court, and their renown spread far and wide as a result. In the 1920s, Marcel Proust wrote about his sort of ratatouille-style flashbacks to his childhood whenever he ate a Madeleine dipped in tea, implying that all French people have some sort of Madeleine memory, and these Mémoires de Proust are now a key part of French culture. Is not a creme brulee. This is actually kind of a rice pudding that has also been bruleed. Somehow, I forgot to take a picture of the creme brulee that I had. But we're going to talk about the creme brulee, which may or may not be French anyway. Similar dishes have existed since the medieval period in France, England, and Spain, and all three claim at least some of the credit for inventing the dish. Certainly custards of various forms existed since humans domesticated dairy cattle and chickens, but the addition of caramelized sugar in some form came into being somewhere in Europe between the 5th and 15th centuries. That really narrows it down for you, I know. There is record of a French version in which a disc of prepared caramel was simply laid atop a baked custard, since nobody had invented the blowtorch just yet. Even though the dish made it across the Atlantic, there is record that Thomas Jefferson himself had it served at the White House. It was included only in cookbooks and it was never served in an inn, tavern, or restaurant until the 1980s, when New York restaurant Le Cirque put it on the dessert menu, and American minds were captivated by it. Since then, it's taken off like wildfire, and this relatively simple preparation of custard with burnt sugar atop it, becoming popularized in the US and spreading across the Atlantic to take Europe by storm and the rest of the world. It was France. Of course, there was cheese. Of the 279 odd officially recognized cheeses that are produced in France, I only sampled a handful. Obviously, we were only there for 10 days. I'm only human. There's only so much that I can possibly consume. And there was only so much that I dare consume. But if this isn't too much personal information, I think I verified that I am not actually lactose intolerant because I ate a lot of cheese. And there was only one cheese that gave me any sort of problems. And it was the cheap unidentified cheese that they served at the breakfast buffet in our hotel. I ate that for the first couple of mornings, had a couple of near misses, and then stopped eating it because I didn't want to do that anymore, and didn't have any problems for the rest of the trip. So I don't think I'm sensitive to cheese. I think I'm sensitive to cheap cheese. I guess I just have a snooty gut, if that's a thing. Anyway, lots of different bries, because that's one of my favorite types of cheese. Both cow, sheep, and goat bries, as well as Ipoise, Comté, Mimolette. Yeah, I can't really name all the cheeses I've had, but suffice it to say, if you want to try a lot of different cheeses, France is the place you want to go. And I feel it important to mention that pizza seemed to be a thing in Paris as well. There were a lot of places I saw that were offering simple one-topping, single cheese, fairly utilitarian pizzas that were good for, a personal lunch. Obviously, pizza is sort of an Italian, well, kind of an Italian and then American and then Italian thing, but seemed to have also gained a foothold in Paris. So obviously we ate a lot more than that, but that's all that I thought to take pictures of while on the trip. So if there are any other quintessential French food items that you think I should talk about, I can certainly make another video and talk about those things. Just, make a comment down below and let me know what you'd like me to talk about next. And in the meantime, I'd like to thank you for watching, and hopefully I will be able to travel more in the future and bring more foods of the world to your screen. So until next time, I'm Mike Uyak, and thanks for watching Recipe Redemption.
In the south of France, sitting right next to you.